It is one of the most iconic artifacts of the ancient world, a magnificent black figure Panathenaic amphora. On one side, a scene of athletic glory, runners straining for the finish line. On the other, the goddess Athena, protector of the city, standing between two columns. For a victorious athlete at the ancient Panathenaic Games, this beautiful vessel was the prize. But the true prize was what it contained, the most precious agricultural product of the Athenian land, a viscous greenish gold liquid harvested from her sacred trees. It was olive oil, a simple, everyday substance, a food, a fuel for lamps, a cleanser for the body. How could this humble liquid be a prize fit for a champion? This documentary will investigate how this seemingly mundane commodity was in fact the strategic asset at the very heart of the Athenian miracle. It was not just oil, it was liquid gold, the fuel that bankrolled the world's first democracy and built the greatest naval empire of its age. To speak of the 5th century BC is to speak of Athens. It is to invoke a moment in human history so brilliant, so dense with innovation, it seems almost miraculous. In this single city, in this single century, the very foundations of the Western world were laid. The radical concept of demokratia, rule by the people, was born. Philosophy was transformed by the minds of Socrates and Plato. Theater became a profound art form in the hands of Sophocles and Aristophanes. And on the Acropolis, the magnificent Parthenon rose, a testament to a civilization at the absolute zenith of its power and confidence. The Golden Age of Athens. But behind this explosion of cultural and political genius lies a hard, unavoidable question. Who paid for all of it? Great navies, radical democracies, and colossal marble temples are not free. The traditional answer is simple: an empire. Athens used its military might to extract tribute from 100 other Greek city-states. But this is only half the story. An empire cannot be sustained on plunder alone. It requires a powerful, foundational economy of its own. And the brilliance of Athens was to create just that, through a deliberate and revolutionary act of economic statecraft. This investigation will argue that the true underlying engine of the Athenian Golden Age was the industrial-scale production and export of a single strategic commodity, olive oil. We will frame the story of Athenian oil not as a simple tale of farming, but as a masterpiece of industrial policy and international trade. It was a conscious decision to turn the city-state's greatest agricultural weakness, its thin, rocky, unforgiving soil, into its greatest economic strength. Our journey will follow the path of this liquid gold from source to superpower. We will begin in the sacred olive groves of Attica, a landscape transformed by a deliberate economic pivot. We will enter the workshops to uncover the technology of the great stone presses that turned this harvest into a river of oil. We will decode the secrets of the painted amphora, a sophisticated piece of packaging and branding that made Athenian oil a trusted, high-value commodity across the Mediterranean. We will chart the great sea lanes of their commercial empire, showing how the trade in oil for the grain of the Black Sea was the lifeblood of their survival. And finally, we will connect the profits from this vast enterprise directly to the two pillars of Athenian power. We will show how this river of silver and gold bankrolled the wooden walls of their navy, the unbeatable fleet of triremes that secured their empire. And we will reveal how that same wealth funded the most radical social experiment in history, by paying the wages that allowed even the poorest citizen to participate in the world's first true democracy. This is the story of how a simple fruit became the financial bedrock of a civilization, the liquid gold that paid for the glory of Athens.
Before olive oil became the engine of the Athenian economy, it was the sacred symbol at the heart of the city's identity. The story of Athens is the story of the olive tree. The connection was not just commercial, it was mythological, a divine charter that tied the city's destiny to this single, remarkable plant. The foundational myth of Athens is not about a great warrior or a conquering king, but about a contest of utility and economic choice. The story, as told by the Athenians, is that the city's first king, Cecrops, needed to choose a patron deity. Two of the most powerful Olympians vied for the honor: Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea, and Athena, the goddess of wisdom and warfare. The contest was held on the high, rocky outcrop of the Acropolis. Poseidon, to demonstrate his power and the gift he would bestow upon the city, struck the rock with his trident, and from it, a saltwater spring gushed forth. It was a spectacular display of divine might, a symbol of the naval power that the sea could offer. Then, it was Athena's turn. She did not perform a violent miracle. Instead, she quietly planted a seed in the ground, and from it, the first olive tree grew. Its leaves were silvery green, its fruit was nourishing, and its oil would become a source of light, sustenance, and wealth. King Cecrops and the people of Athens wisely chose Athena's gift. It was a gift that was sustainable, productive, and life-giving. From that day forward, the city was named Athens, the olive tree was sacred to its patron goddess, and the fate of the two were forever intertwined. This myth is more than just a charming story. It is a profound piece of economic geography, a metaphor for the reality of the Athenian environment. The land of Attica, the territory controlled by Athens, is a landscape of thin, rocky, limestone-based soil, baked by a hot, dry sun. It is a land that is fundamentally unsuited for large-scale, intensive grain farming. For centuries, this had been Athens' greatest vulnerability. The city could not reliably feed itself. It was dependent on imported grain, a precarious position for any ancient state. Poseidon's gift of the sea was in fact a necessity. The Athenians had to be a maritime power to import the food they could not grow. But the very same conditions that made the land poor for grain made it a paradise for the olive tree. The Olea unipea is a masterpiece of botanical resilience. It is an incredibly hardy, drought-resistant tree. Its deep, wide-ranging root system is perfectly adapted to seek out moisture in poor, rocky soil. Its small, waxy, silver-green leaves are designed to minimize water loss under the relentless Mediterranean sun. It can survive where other crops wither and die. It requires little maintenance, and it is incredibly long-lived, capable of producing fruit for hundreds, even thousands of years. Athena's gift was in fact the perfect agricultural solution to the specific geological and climatic challenges of the Attic Peninsula. The Athenians didn't just have olive trees. They had the perfect environment to grow the best olive oil in the world. The product of this sacred tree was a substance of almost infinite utility, a true liquid gold. In the ancient world, olive oil was far more than a simple food. It was first and foremost a primary source of dietary fat and calories, a cornerstone of the so-called Mediterranean triad of bread, wine, and oil. But its role in the economy of the household went far beyond the kitchen. It was the primary source of light. The soft, smoky glow of a simple clay olive oil lamp was what illuminated the homes of rich and poor alike after sunset. It was the ancient world's soap. Athletes and commoners alike would cover their bodies in oil, which would bind to the dirt and sweat and then scrape it off with a curved metal tool called a strigling. It was also a base for perfumes and cosmetics, a sacred liquid for religious libations, and a vital medicine used as a balm for wounds and an ointment for skin ailments. A single product served the functions that in our world are filled by butter, electricity, soap, cosmetics, and pharmaceuticals. This incredible range of uses meant that the demand for olive oil was universal, constant, and immense, both within Athens and across the entire Mediterranean world. Any society that could produce a significant surplus of this essential commodity would be sitting on a veritable gold mine. This was the commercial potential that the Athenians would eventually harness on an industrial scale. The mythological bond between the city and the tree was destined to become the foundation of a revolutionary ancient traded empire. For centuries, the olive tree had been a sacred symbol and a staple of the Attic farmstead, but it was not yet the engine of an empire. The transformation of Athenian agriculture from a simple subsistence-based model into a powerful export-oriented industrial enterprise was not a slow, organic evolution. It was the direct result of a single, radical, top-down legislative act. In the early 6th century BC, nearly a century before the Golden Age, Athens was a city on the brink of civil war, crippled by debt, social inequality, and a failing economy. To solve this crisis, the city turned to one man, the statesman and poet Solon. And among his sweeping social and political reforms was a single, seemingly simple economic decree that would change the destiny of Athens forever. He banned the export of all agricultural products, with one revolutionary exception: olive oil. To understand the genius of this act, we must first understand the crisis that Solon was trying to solve. Archaic Athens was facing a classic Malthusian trap. Its population was growing, but its poor, rocky soil could not produce enough grain to feed its people. Small farmers working their ancestral plots were being driven into a devastating cycle of debt. To survive, they would borrow from the wealthy landed aristocracy, the eupatridae. When they inevitably defaulted, they were reduced to a form of serfdom, working the land for their creditors, or even worse, were sold along with their families into slavery to pay off their debts. This system, known as debt bondage, was tearing the social fabric of Athens apart. The city was a powder keg of class tension, with the disenfranchised poor on the verge of a violent, bloody revolution against the landowning elite. Solon's famous political reforms, which laid the very first groundwork for democracy, were designed to defuse this crisis. He canceled all existing debts, he freed the debt slaves, and he created a more equitable system of political participation. But he knew that these political fixes were just a temporary bandage. To create a lasting solution, he had to solve the underlying economic problem, the chronic unprofitability and insufficiency of Attic agriculture. He needed to find a way for the small Athenian farmer to make a living from the poor soil of the land. His solution was not to try and grow more grain, which he knew was a losing battle, but to fundamentally pivot the entire agricultural economy of the state towards a product where Athens had a natural, God-given advantage. The olive oil law was a masterpiece of economic statecraft. By banning the export of grain, figs, and other produce, Solon was essentially forcing the Athenian economy to specialize. He was sending a clear, unambiguous signal to every farmer in Attica: stop trying to compete in the low-profit, high-volume grain market where you are destined to fail. Instead, invest your time, your land, and your labor in the one commodity where our unique climate and soil give us an unparalleled competitive edge. He was, in essence, using state power to force the entire agricultural sector to adopt a strategy of comparative advantage. This was a green revolution by decree, a conscious and deliberate restructuring of the entire productive base of the Athenian state, shifting it from a model of failed self-sufficiency to one of specialized export-oriented commercial agriculture. This was, however, a long-term gamble. An olive tree is not a wheat stalk. It takes years, sometimes a decade or more, for a newly planted tree to bear fruit. Solon's reform was not a quick fix, it was a generational investment. It required immense foresight and a profound faith in the future of the Athenian state. It was an act that was likely deeply unpopular with some factions. The landed aristocracy, who controlled the best grain-producing land, would have seen their traditional power base threatened.
The urban poor, reliant on a stable food supply, would have been terrified by a policy that seemed to be abandoning the goal of grain self-sufficiency. But the long-term effects were transformative. Over the next several generations, the landscape of Attica was physically remade. Farmers began to rip up their less profitable grain fields and plant the hardy, lucrative olive trees. Terraces were built on the hillsides to maximize the available land. The entire countryside was slowly transformed into a vast silver-green engine for the production of liquid gold. This state-sponsored industrial policy created for the first time a truly massive agricultural surplus. It was a surplus not of food for local consumption, but of a high-value, non-perishable, and universally desired commodity that was perfect for ancient trade. Solon's law did more than just change what the farmers grew, it changed their entire relationship with the wider world. It permanently integrated the small Attic farmer into the international maritime economy of the Mediterranean. Their prosperity no longer depended on the whims of a local harvest, but on the market price of oil in the distant ports of the Black Sea and Egypt. This economic revolution, born from a moment of crisis, was the essential precondition for the Athenian Golden Age. It was Solon who loaded the economic gun. A century later, when the Persian threat loomed and a new generation of leaders like Themistocles needed to fund a massive navy, it would be the immense taxable profits from this olive oil trade that would provide the gunpowder.
Solon's reform had created the incentive for an agricultural revolution. But to transform that revolution into a true economic superpower required more than just planting trees. It required technology. The Athenians and their contemporaries in the Greek world needed to develop a system for processing the olive harvest on a massive industrial scale. A system that was both efficient enough to be profitable and capable of producing a high-quality product that could dominate the international market. The solution was the Greek olive press, the trapetum. This was not a simple farmstead tool. It was a powerful and sophisticated piece of machinery, the engine room of the entire liquid gold economy. The story of this technology is the story of how the raw bounty of the Attic groves was transformed into a standardized, tradable, and immensely valuable commodity. The process began with the harvest. In the late autumn, the olive groves of Attica would come alive with a flurry of activity. The harvest was a labor-intensive process, often involving the entire family. Workers would climb the trees and beat the branches with long, flexible poles, causing the ripe olives to rain down onto large canvases spread out on the ground below. It was a race against time. The moment an olive is picked, a process of oxidation and enzymatic breakdown begins, which increases the acidity of the oil and lowers its quality. To produce the finest, extra virgin olive oil, the amphakion, the olives had to be transported from the grove to the press and processed as quickly as possible, ideally on the same day. This logistical urgency was the first sign that this was a well-organized, time-sensitive industrial operation. The heart of this operation was the press house. Archaeological remains of these facilities have been found all over the ancient Greek world. Here, the first stage of the process was to crush the entire olive, pit and all, into a thick, pulpy paste. This was done in a trapetum, or olive crusher. The typical design consisted of a large, circular, hollowed-out stone basin. In the center was a pivot, and on this pivot rested a long wooden beam. At either end of the beam was a massive lenticular stone wheel. As an animal or human laborers pushed the beam in a circle, the heavy stone wheels would roll and turn within the basin, crushing the olives into a uniform pulp. This was a heavy-duty industrial-scale mill designed for continuous high-volume processing. Once the olive paste, or samsa, was ready, the most critical stage of the process began: the extraction of the oil. The paste was scooped into porous woven bags or baskets made of hemp or rushes. These bags were then stacked, like thick pancakes, onto the bed of the press itself. The Athenian press of the classical period was a magnificent piece of mechanical engineering, a massive lever press. It consisted of a huge, heavy wooden beam, sometimes 30 or 40 feet long, one end of which was anchored into a wall or a set of stone uprights. The stack of olive paste bags was placed under the beam, and then immense pressure was applied to the free end.
This was done either by using a powerful winch and pulley system, or simply by attaching massive stone counterweights to the beam, which could be raised and lowered to apply hundreds, even thousands of pounds onto the stack. As the pressure was applied, the magic of the liquid gold would begin to flow. The first liquid to emerge from the bags was the most prized. It was a mixture of oil and the bitter vegetable water from the fruit. This mixture was channeled into a series of settling tanks. Here, the simple principle of physics took over. Oil is lighter than water. The mixture was left to sit, and the beautiful greenish gold olive oil would slowly rise to the top, where it could be carefully skimmed off. This first pressing, done with relatively gentle pressure, produced the highest quality extra virgin olive oil, the prize of the Panathenaic Games and the treasured export of the Athenian economy. The remaining pulp could then be pressed a second and even a third time, with greater pressure and sometimes with the addition of hot water to extract every last drop of oil. These lower quality pressings were darker, more acidic, and would be sold for use in lamps or as a basic cleanser, ensuring that no part of the valuable harvest was wasted. The entire operation was a testament to the Greek understanding of mechanics and industrial processes. The scale was impressive. A single large press could process several tons of olives in a day. A wealthy landowner might have a press house with multiple crushers and presses operating simultaneously, a true factory floor dedicated to the mass production of this single commodity. This was a capital-intensive enterprise. The construction of the heavy stone mills, the acquisition of the massive wooden beams, and the building of the press house itself required a significant financial investment. This suggests that the olive oil trade was not just a business for the small farmer, but was also dominated by a class of wealthy, entrepreneurial landowners who had the capital to invest in this industrial technology. This technology was the essential link between Solon's agricultural policy and Athens' economic supremacy. It provided the means to convert the vast surplus of the Attic olive harvest into a standardized, high-quality, and immensely profitable manufactured good. The rhythmic, creaking groan of the great lever press was the sound of the Athenian economic engine at work, a machine that turned a sacred fruit into the liquid currency that would build an empire.
The industrial presses of Attica had produced a river of liquid gold. But for this oil to become a cornerstone of international trade, it needed to be packaged, transported, and sold. This required a final and equally brilliant piece of Athenian technology, the shipping amphora. These humble terracotta jars were the linchpin of the entire Mediterranean economy, the standardized containers that made long-distance commerce in liquids like wine and oil possible. The Athenians, however, elevated the amphora from a simple container to a powerful instrument of their economic statecraft. Through a combination of standardized design, state-enforced quality control, and, on their most prestigious jars, a breathtakingly beautiful artistic style, they turned the Athenian oil amphora into a globally recognized brand, a guarantee of quality that dominated the ancient marketplace. The fundamental genius of the amphora was its design. The standard Athenian oil amphora of the classical period was a large, two-handled jar with a narrow neck and a distinctive tapering shape that ended in a small, pointed base. Every feature of this design was the result of centuries of practical refinement. The narrow neck minimized the surface area of the oil exposed to the air, reducing the risk of oxidation and spoilage. It could be easily sealed with a clay or cork stopper, which was then often countersealed with clay stamped by a magistrate's seal, a state-enforced guarantee of the contents. The two handles made it easy for dock workers to lift and maneuver the heavy jars, and the pointed base allowed them to be packed securely in a nested pattern in the hold of a ship or to be easily set into the sandy ground of a warehouse or marketplace. Crucially, the Athenians produced these jars to a standardized volume. An Athenian 1 amphora measure was a standard unit of capacity, roughly equivalent to 10 modern US gallons or 39 liters. This standardization was a revolutionary concept in the ancient trade. It meant that a merchant in a distant Black Sea port could buy 10 amphorae of Athenian oil
and know, with a high degree of certainty, exactly how much product he was getting. This eliminated the need for complex and often untrustworthy measurements at the point of sale. It created a predictable, fungible commodity, transforming the trade from a chaotic bazaar of haggling into a sophisticated wholesale business. This system of standardized measures was a key part of the administrative infrastructure that underpinned the entire Athenian commercial empire. But the Athenians went a step further. They understood that in a competitive marketplace, it wasn't enough to have a good product, you had to have a recognizable brand. For their most prestigious oil, the prize oil from the sacred groves given to the victors of the Panathenaic Games, they created one of the most iconic and beautiful packages in human history, the Panathenaic prize amphora. These were magnificent, large-scale vases decorated by the finest painters in Athens in the sophisticated black figure technique. On one side, they always depicted the goddess Athena Promochus, striding forward between two columns. On the other, a vivid scene of the athletic event for which the prize was won: chariot racing, running, wrestling. These were not just beautiful objects, they were brilliant pieces of marketing. They were a walking advertisement for the city of Athens, a symbol of its cultural superiority, its piety, and the sacred quality of its signature product. When a victorious athlete took his prize of, say, 40 Panathenaic amphorae home to his native city in Sicily or Magna Graecia, he wasn't just bringing home a supply of oil. He was importing a powerful status symbol, a piece of Athenian excellence. These prize jars and the hundreds of smaller, less ornate, but still distinctively Athenian amphorae that flooded the market created an immediate and powerful brand recognition. An Athenian amphora looked different from a Corinthian or a Chian one. This distinctive packaging allowed Athenian oil to stand out in a crowded marketplace, its very shape and style becoming a guarantee of its origin and its quality. The archaeological evidence for the success of this strategy is overwhelming. Athenian amphorae from the 6th and 5th centuries BC have been found in their thousands in every corner of the Mediterranean and Black Sea worlds. They're found in the graves of Scythian warlords in the Crimea, in Celtic hill forts in France, and in Etruscan tombs in Italy. This vast distribution network is the physical footprint of the Athenian export economy. Each shattered fragment of an Athenian jar found 1,000 miles from home is a data point, a testament to the immense reach and market dominance of their liquid gold. It proves that the Athenians were not just brilliant philosophers and politicians, they were master marketers and logistics geniuses who understood that to build an economic empire, you must control not only the means of production, but also the very package that carries your brand to the world.
With an industrial-scale production system and a sophisticated branded packaging technology in place, Athens was poised for commercial domination. The final piece of the puzzle was the creation of a vast and reliable network of maritime trade routes, the arteries through which their liquid gold would flow out and life-sustaining resources would flow in. The Athenian commercial empire was not a land-based territory of conquest, but a dynamic, fluid network of sea lanes, climate states, and strategic port connections. At the very heart of this sprawling system was the magnificent port of Piraeus, a masterpiece of urban and logistical planning that served as the bustling, thrumming heart of the entire Athenian economy and the primary hub for their global ambitions. The primary and most strategically vital of all Athenian trade routes was the Great Northeastern Passage, the route that led through the Aegean Sea, up through the treacherous straits of the Hellespont and the Bosphorus, and into the vast, fertile basin of the Black Sea, known to the Greeks as the Pontos Euxinos. This was the great lifeline of Athens, the artery that solved the city's fundamental agricultural weakness. The lands bordering the Black Sea, particularly the territories of the Scythians in modern-day Ukraine, were the breadbasket of the ancient world, a region of seemingly limitless grain production. The Athenians, with their export-oriented olive oil economy, had deliberately chosen to become dependent on this foreign grain supply. Their entire social and political stability rested on their ability to keep this trade route open. The economic exchange was a perfect example of comparative advantage. Athens would export the high-value, manufactured, and easily transportable goods that the Scythians and other Black Sea peoples craved: beautifully painted pottery, fine silverwork, and above all, a steady supply of their liquid gold, olive oil, which could not be produced in the colder northern climate. In return, a massive, continuous fleet of grain ships, the Black Ships, would haul the raw, bulky, but life-sustaining wheat back to Athens. This was a trade of technology and luxury for sustenance, a bargain that fueled both civilizations. The Athenians established colonies and friendly port relationships all along this route, creating a chain of secure harbors that ensured their merchant fleet could travel with a degree of safety. Control of this route was not just a commercial priority, it was a matter of national survival. But the Athenian commercial network was far from a one-route system. Their branded amphorae reveal a web of trade that reached every corner of the known world. A second major artery of commerce flowed westwards to the Greek colonies in Sicily and southern Italy, a region known as Magna Graecia. These were wealthy, sophisticated city-states in their own right, and they were a major market for Athenian luxury goods, including their high-quality olive oil and fine painted pottery. The discovery of thousands of Athenian vases in Etruscan tombs in central Italy reveals another lucrative market, where the Athenians traded their manufactured goods for the valuable metals of the Italian peninsula. A third vital route led south to the ancient and immensely wealthy kingdom of Egypt. The Egyptians, while they produced some of their own oil, had an insatiable demand for the high-quality, prestigious olive oil of Athens. In exchange, the Athenians would import not just Egyptian grain, a vital supplement to their Black Sea supply, but also the luxury goods of Africa, like ivory and exotic woods, and most importantly, papyrus, the essential material for the administration of their complex, literate democracy. This trade with Egypt was one of the oldest and most important in the Greek world, a foundational pillar of the Eastern Mediterranean economy. All of these sprawling trade routes converged on a single point, the Piraeus. Under the visionary leadership of Themistocles and later Pericles, the Athenians transformed the natural harbors of the Piraeus into the largest and most sophisticated port complex in the ancient world. It was a city in its own right, connected to Athens by the famous Long Walls, a fortified corridor that ensured the city could never be starved out as long as it controlled the sea. The Piraeus was a masterpiece of logistical engineering, with separate harbors for commercial and military vessels, massive ship sheds for maintaining their fleet of triremes, and sprawling warehouses, or degmata, where goods from all over the world were displayed and traded. The Piraeus was more than just a port. It was the physical embodiment of Athens' open, cosmopolitan, and commerce-driven society. On any given day, its docks would have been a chaotic, multilingual babel of sailors, merchants, and entrepreneurs from dozens of different city-states and empires, all coming to Athens to do business. It was the Wall Street of the 5th century BC, the undeniable center of the Greek economic world. The taxes and duties collected from the immense volume of goods passing through this port were a massive and direct source of revenue for the Athenian state. It was a self-perpetuating engine of wealth. The olive oil trade provided the initial export product that powered the system, and the port provided the infrastructure to manage its immense profits that would soon be used to fund the city's most ambitious and world-changing projects.
The Athenian commercial empire was a magnificent creation, a testament to their skill in production, marketing, and logistics. But in the dangerous, competitive world of ancient Greece, a trade empire without a military to protect it was a house built on sand. The ultimate guarantor of Athenian prosperity, the instrument that enforced their dominance and secured their vital trade routes, was their navy. The Athenian fleet of triremes, the wooden walls of the city, was the most powerful, most technologically advanced, and most ruthlessly effective military force of its day. But it was also an enterprise of almost unimaginable expense. The story of how Athens paid for this fleet is the story of a perfect synergy between state finance and the private sector, a system in which the profits from the liquid gold of the olive oil trade became a vital, indispensable component in bankrolling the very instrument that protected it. The primary vessel of the Athenian navy was the trireme. This was a light, fast, and deadly warship, a sleek, three-tiered galley powered by 170 oarsmen, designed for a single purpose: to ram and sink enemy ships with its massive bronze-sheathed ram. At its peak, the Athenian navy numbered over 200 of these advanced vessels, a fleet of a size and power that no other Greek city-state could hope to match. But the cost of this naval supremacy was staggering. The initial construction of a single trireme, a complex feat of engineering requiring seasoned timber and skilled craftsmen, was a massive expense. And the ongoing operational costs were even greater. Each of the 200 ships required a highly trained crew of 200 men, 170 rowers, and 30 sailors and marines. This was a professional, standing navy of 40,000 men, and these men had to be paid. Their wages, especially during wartime, were the single largest expenditure of the Athenian state. The traditional story of how Athens funded this fleet centers on a different kind of mineral wealth: the silver from the state-owned mines at Laurion. In 483 BC, a massive new vein of silver was discovered, creating a sudden windfall for the state. The visionary statesman Themistocles famously persuaded the Athenian assembly not to distribute this wealth as a cash handout to the citizens, but to invest it in a massive naval construction program, a decision that would prove decisive in the coming war against Persia. The silver of Laurion was, without question, the foundational capital that allowed Athens to build its fleet. But a one-time windfall, however large, cannot sustain a permanent military force for decades. For that, Athens needed a constant, reliable, and massive stream of annual revenue. This is where the olive oil economy became a critical pillar of state finance. The trade in liquid gold generated wealth at multiple levels, all of which was taxable by the state. First, there were the customs duties and harbor taxes. Every amphora of oil that was exported from the Piraeus and every amphora of grain that was imported in its place was taxed. Given the immense volume of this trade, these port duties alone would have generated a colossal annual income for the state treasury, a steady stream of cash that could be used directly to pay the wages of the thousands of rowers. Second, there was the wealth of the producers themselves. The great landowners who had invested in the industrial-scale production of olive oil became one of the wealthiest classes in Athenian society. As wealthy citizens, they were subject to a special form of taxation known as a liturgy. This was a system where the richest citizens were expected to volunteer to pay for major state expenses. One of the most important of these liturgies was the triarchy, where a wealthy citizen would be personally responsible for the outfitting and annual maintenance of a single trireme. The profits from a particularly good year in the olive oil trade could be directly converted into a brand new, fully equipped warship for the Athenian navy. The private sector was, in effect, directly funding the military that protected its commercial interests. This created a perfect, self-reinforcing economic and military feedback loop. The state, using its initial silver wealth, built a powerful navy. This navy was then used to project Athenian power across the Aegean, creating the Delian League, which quickly transformed from a defensive alliance into a tribute-paying Athenian empire. The navy secured the sea lanes, making it safe for Athenian merchants to expand their lucrative olive oil trade to every corner of the Mediterranean. The immense profits from this expanded ancient trade then flowed back to Athens, where the state taxed it at the ports, and the wealthy producers paid for the maintenance of the fleet. In essence, the fleet protected the trade, and the trade paid for the fleet. It was a brilliant and highly effective system of imperial finance, a partnership between public military power and private commercial wealth. The silver of Laurion may have built the ship, but it was the steady annual flow of liquid gold that kept it afloat, paid its crew, and powered the Athenian empire.
The Athenian navy, bankrolled by silver and oil, was the instrument of its empire. But it was the city's radical political and cultural life that was its true legacy. The Golden Age of Athens, the era of Pericles,
was the crucible in which the Western world was forged. It was the age of the Parthenon, of Sophocles, of Socrates, and above all, of democratia, a system of direct participatory rule by the citizens that was unprecedented in its scope and ambition. But this magnificent cultural and political superstructure rested upon an economic foundation. The great question of the Athenian miracle is not just who conceived of these ideas, but who paid for them. The answer, in large part, is that the wealth generated by the city's dominant position in the international olive oil trade was the liquid asset that made the radical experiment of Athenian democracy economically possible. The democracy of Periclean Athens was far more than just the right to vote. It was a deeply participatory system that demanded an immense commitment of time from its citizens. The assembly, where major decisions were made, met as often as every 10 days. The law courts were staffed by huge juries of hundreds, sometimes thousands of citizens, chosen by lot. The Council of 500, which set the daily agenda for the city, was a full-time job. For a wealthy aristocrat, this was not a problem. But for a common Athenian, a small farmer, a craftsman, a laborer, to take a day off from his work to participate in the jury or the assembly was to lose a day's wages. It was to choose between his civic duty and feeding his family. An unpaid democracy is, in effect, a democracy only for the rich. The revolutionary solution, championed by the great statesman Pericles, was the introduction of state pay for public service. Jurors were paid a daily wage. Council members were paid. Even the thousands of citizens who attended the assembly were eventually paid a small stipend for their time. This was one of the most radical and important innovations in political history. It transformed democracy from an ideal into a functioning reality for the common man. It ensured that even the poorest citizen, the theet, could afford to leave his work and participate in the governance of his city. But this system was also incredibly expensive. It was a massive, ongoing state expenditure, a social program that required a constant and reliable stream of public revenue. Where did this money come from? A significant portion, of course, came from the tribute paid by the subject states of the Athenian Empire, a source of income secured by the navy. But the domestic economy was an equally vital pillar, and that economy was dominated by the immense profits of ancient trade. The duties and taxes collected at the bustling port of Piraeus, the great nexus of the olive oil and grain trade, poured into the state treasury. The wealth of the city's merchants and producers, a class that had grown rich from the export of liquid gold, was subject to liturgies and special taxes that funded all aspects of the state. The trade in olive oil did not just fund the navy that protected the empire, it also provided the essential cash flow that paid the wages of democracy at home. This river of commercial wealth also funded the most visible and enduring legacy of the Golden Age, the spectacular public building program on the Acropolis. After the Persians had sacked Athens in 480 BC, they had left the city's sacred heart in ruins. It was Pericles who initiated the ambitious, multi-generational project to rebuild it on the scale of unprecedented magnificence. This was the project that gave us the Parthenon, the Erechtheion, and the Propylaea. But these were not just beautiful temples, they were a massive public works program, the largest state-sponsored economic stimulus in Athenian history. The construction of the Acropolis employed thousands of people. It required quarrymen, masons, carpenters, sculptors, painters, and an army of unskilled laborers. It required the import of the finest materials from across the empire. The entire enterprise was a colossal expenditure of public funds. In his Life of Pericles, the historian Plutarch explicitly describes the economic logic. He writes that Pericles argued that the state's surplus wealth should be spent on projects that would bring it eternal glory, and crucially, provide an income for every man. By paying wages to the thousands of citizens who built the temples, Pericles was, in effect, redistributing the profits of the city's commercial and imperial success back to the people. This ensured full employment, fostered a sense of civic pride and shared enterprise, and further enabled the common citizen to participate in the life of the democracy. The same trade-based wealth that paid for the juror's stipend was also paying the stonemason's wage.
The Parthenon, in this sense, was a temple built on a foundation of olive oil. The Athenian Golden Age was a perfect, integrated system, a circuit of power in which a strategic economy, a dominant military, a radical democracy, and a vibrant public culture all funded and reinforced one another.
For half a century, the Athenian system had been a marvel of synergistic power. Its commercial wealth funded a navy, which enforced an empire, which in turn funded a democracy and a golden age of culture. But this rapid rise to dominance inevitably created fear and resentment among its rivals. The primary rival was the grim, militaristic, land-based power of Sparta. The clash between these two superpowers and their respective allies, the Great Peloponnesian War, was a brutal, generation-long struggle that would consume the Greek world. But it was more than just a simple contest of land power versus sea power. At its core, it was a clash of two fundamentally different economic systems. And the Spartan strategy reveals a deep, if brutish, understanding of the Athenian economy. Their primary war aim was not just to defeat the Athenian army, but to bankrupt the Athenian state by systematically destroying the very source of its liquid gold, the sacred olive groves of Attica. The strategic dilemma at the outset of the war was clear. Athens, under the leadership of Pericles, adopted a maritime strategy. They knew they could not defeat the legendary Spartan hoplite army in a pitched land battle. Instead, they would treat their city as an island. The entire population of Attica would withdraw behind the protection of the long walls, the fortified corridor that connected the city to its lifeline, the port of Piraeus. From this impregnable fortress, their superior navy would continue to rule the seas, protecting their vital trade routes, ensuring the grain ships from the Black Sea could arrive uninterrupted, and launching raids on the Spartan coastline. It was a strategy of asymmetrical warfare, designed to make Spartans' land dominance irrelevant. Pericles' gamble was that he could outlast the Spartans, that their agricultural economy would collapse before Athens' commercial economy did. The Spartans, in response, adopted a strategy of brutal, primitive, and deeply personal economic warfare. Every year, in the early summer, the great Spartan army would muster and march north into the Athenian homeland of Attica. They did not seek a decisive battle, which they knew Pericles would refuse them. Their target was the land itself. As the Athenians watched helplessly from their crowded city walls, the Spartans and their allies would spend weeks systematically ravaging the countryside. They burned the barley fields, they tore up the vineyards, but they reserved their most destructive efforts for the most valuable and most vulnerable asset of the Athenian economy, the olive groves. The destruction of an olive grove was a particularly cruel and devastating act of war. An olive tree is not a seasonal crop like grain. Many of the trees the Spartans targeted were ancient, some planted in the generation after Solon's reforms, and they represented a massive long-term investment of capital and labor. To destroy one was not just to destroy a single harvest, but to cripple the productive capacity of the land for a generation. A newly planted olive tree can take over a decade to become productive again. The Spartans, with their axes and torches, were not just burning wood, they were burning the long-term financial assets of the Athenian state and its wealthiest citizens. The historian Thucydides describes these annual invasions with a grim matter-of-factness. But for the Athenians, watching from the walls, it must have been a scene of almost unbearable psychological and economic horror, as the source of their prosperity went up in smoke. This was a deliberate strategy to break the will of the Athenian people and to bankrupt its elite. The wealthy landowners who formed the cavalry and the upper classes of the Athenian military were the ones who owned the great olive estates. By targeting their property, the Spartans hoped to create a powerful anti-war faction within the city, an elite class that would pressure the government to abandon Pericles' maritime strategy and march out to fight a decisive land battle to protect their property. For the first decade of the war, this strategy created immense hardship, but ultimately failed to achieve its objective. The profits from the overseas trade and the tribute from the empire were still enough to fund the war effort, and the city's democratic institutions held firm. But the strategy of economic attrition, combined with the immense cost of the war and a devastating plague that swept through the crowded city, slowly began to take its toll. The constant destruction of the olive groves weakened the productive base of the Athenian economy. While the sea lanes remained open for a time, the foundational export commodity that had powered the system was being systematically annihilated. The war would drag on for 27 brutal years, Athens would eventually make a series of catastrophic strategic blunders, most notably the disastrous Sicilian expedition, which destroyed the flower of its navy. But the long, slow, grinding war of economic attrition waged by the Spartans against the Attic countryside had undeniably weakened the state, bled its treasury, and crippled the very industry that had funded its golden age. When Athens finally surrendered in 404 BC, it was not just a military defeat, it was an economic one. The wooden walls of the fleet had been broken, but the sacred olive trees that had paid for them had long since been reduced to ash.
Our investigation began with a simple question. How did the city of Athens, with its poor soil and constant need for imported food, pay for the miracle of its golden age? We have followed the trail of its liquid gold, from the sacred groves of Attica to the bustling port of Piraeus and across the great trade routes of the Mediterranean. Having deconstructed its production, its branding, and the vast profits it generated, the evidence allows for a clear and powerful verdict. The Golden Age of Athens was not a historical accident, nor was it a simple product of philosophy and plunder. It was the direct result of a brilliant and fully integrated economic strategy, a system in which the industrial-scale export of olive oil was the foundational pillar that supported both its democratic ideals at home and its imperial power abroad. We have established that the Athenian olive oil economy was a deliberate creation of state policy. Solon's revolutionary decree, banning the export of all other agricultural goods, was a masterful act of economic statecraft. It forced the Athenian state to pivot, transforming its greatest geographical weakness, its rocky, arid soil, into its greatest competitive strength. By specializing in the one high-value commodity it could produce better than anyone else. Our investigation has demonstrated that the Athenians met this challenge with technological and commercial genius. They developed industrial-scale presses to mass-produce the oil, and they perfected the standardized branded amphora as a sophisticated tool for its transport and marketing. This allowed them to dominate the international trade network, creating a vast export economy that brought a river of silver and gold flowing back into the city's treasury. Crucially, we have drawn a direct line from these commercial profits to the two great pillars of Athenian power. First, the navy. We have shown how the wealth from the oil trade, through direct taxation at the ports and through the liturgies of the wealthy producers, was the essential sustainable revenue stream that paid for the maintenance of the wooden walls, the fleet of 200 triremes that protected the trade routes and enforced the empire. The fleet protected the trade, and the trade paid for the fleet in a perfect self-reinforcing loop of power. Second, democracy. We have shown how that same river of wealth was funneled into the domestic economy, most remarkably in the form of state pay for public service. This radical innovation, paid for by the profits of empire and commerce, was the economic key that unlocked the full potential of Athenian democracy, allowing even the poorest citizens to participate. It also funded the great public works program of the Acropolis, an economic stimulus that brought both glory and employment to the city. Therefore, the final conclusion of our investigation is this. The Parthenon was a temple built on a foundation of olive oil. The Athenian navy was a fleet that sailed on a sea of liquid gold. And Athenian democracy was a radical experiment paid for by the profits of a globalized economy. The story of liquid gold is the essential and often overlooked economic backstory to the glory of Athens, a powerful testament to how a civilization's greatest cultural achievements can be bankrolled by the strategic mastery of a single humble commodity.
The Golden Age of Athens was brilliant, but tragically brief. The devastating Peloponnesian War, which saw its sacred olive groves reduced to ash, shattered the city's power and brought its imperial moment to an end. The Parthenon still stands, a silent, beautiful ruin, but the bustling port of Piraeus and the great naval sheds are long gone. Yet the legacy of the Athenian economic experiment endures, a powerful and timeless lesson in the profound and often inseparable relationship between commerce, culture, and power. The story of Athens' liquid gold is not just a chapter in ancient trade. It is the foundational blueprint for the idea of a civilization powered by commerce. The Athenian model was a masterclass in turning a disadvantage into a dominant strength. Faced with a homeland that could not feed them, they did not resign themselves to being a second-rate power. Instead, through a deliberate act of state policy, they restructured their entire economy. They chose to embrace the global market, to specialize, and to trade. They made a conscious decision to be a nation of manufacturers and exporters, a city that lived and died by its ability to control the sea lanes. This was a revolutionary concept in a world still largely dominated by land-based agrarian empires. It was a model that would be emulated by future commercial powers, from the Venetian Republic to the British Empire. A small homeland can project immense global power if it masters the sea and dominates the trade in a high-value commodity. The story of Athenian olive oil is also a profound testament to the idea that a nation's cultural and political achievements are built upon an economic foundation. The radical brilliance of Athenian democracy and the sublime beauty of the Acropolis were not created in a vacuum. They were the products of a society that was prosperous enough to afford them. The wealth generated by the olive oil trade was the essential fuel that allowed Athens to experiment, to innovate, and to invest in the very ideas and institutions that we now consider the bedrock of Western civilization. It is a powerful reminder that behind every great age of art, philosophy, and political progress, there is an economy robust enough to pay the bills. The glory of Athens teaches us that culture and commerce are not opposing forces. They're often two sides of the same golden coin. Finally, the fate of Athens is a cautionary tale. The very system that gave it its strength, its reliance on an open, maritime, globalized economy, also created its greatest vulnerabilities. Its dependence on imported grain made control of the sea an existential necessity. Its reliance on a single, primary export commodity made its agricultural heartland a prime target for economic warfare. When its trade routes were challenged and its productive capacity was destroyed, the entire magnificent superstructure came crashing down. The Athenian story is a timeless lesson in the delicate balance between the immense rewards of a globalized economy and the immense risks of its inherent interdependencies. Thus, the humble olive tree, the sacred gift of the goddess Athena, stands as the ultimate symbol of the city's genius and its tragic fate. It was a symbol of peace and prosperity, a source of sustenance and light, and when harnessed by a visionary economic strategy, it became the engine of an empire. The story of liquid gold is the story of how a simple fruit, cultivated with wisdom and traded with daring, can provide the financial fuel to change the world.